Yes, I have sound. Okay, so welcome to GRID-Arendal's backyard on a Thursday afternoon in Arendalsvika. Uka, til og med. It's been a long week already, but it's an extremely important topic we are discussing here today. So we will have the energy and we will really have a good debate. So welcome so much. My name is Karen Landmark. I have the privilege of being the managing director of GRID-Arendal, and I'll be your host in this debate. Blue carbon. What is blue carbon? It refers to the carbon that is captured and stored in coastal ecosystems, such as mangroves, seagrasses, and salt marshes. And as all ecosystems, these ecosystems also have their unique role to play. And left unharmed, they can mitigate climate change by absorbing large amount of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And that's blue carbon. And then what is blue carbon finance? Blue carbon finance involves investments and funding mechanisms that aims to, but perhaps not always manage, to preserve and restore these ecosystems. And then the question is, I guess, can market mechanisms help save the planet? And if that's the case, how? Or is this another fixed idea from capitalism? This and more we will touch into today. And we have a great panel with us. Gabriella Kosman, please come up. Senior Advisor in NORAD and Policy Expert on Blue Carbon in Development Policy. Caroline Ander, General Secretary of WWF Norway. And I must add, also the Chair of the Board of GRID-Arendal. And last but not least, Stephen, Blue Carbon Lead in GRID-Arendal and technical expert on blue carbon as a financial mechanism, including opportunities and risks. I think we will share more of that. So then, without further ado, I want to start with... yeah, look at that. You want... Yes, okay.
That's why. We will move back. There's a PowerPoint coming, right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
We've got a few slides to entertain you.
Okay.
It's either that or I tap dance, and I'm really bad at tap dancing. So,
Stephen, you will give us an introduction. You will start, and you will give us, I hope, an overview of the blue carbon market and the role blue carbon can play in sustainable management. And I think, knowing you, that you also will touch into both the opportunities and the risks.
a wee bit.
Yes.
Let's go.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Okay, first slide.
Just stand behind there, maybe to see the slides.
Oh, do I do it? Okay. It's not like magic, is it? Okay. I guess it's the green button. Great. So, thank you very much for coming. I'm Stephen Lutz, Blue Carbon Lead at GRID-Arendal. I've been working on blue carbon for a wee bit since 2008. I'd like to thank everybody for showing up and everybody online. This is streamed and will be recorded. A wee bit about GRID-Arendal and blue carbon is back in 2009, in late 2009, GRID-Arendal and UNEP published the Blue Carbon Report. And this really started the whole sort of blue carbon movement. And the idea back then was to merge the fields of marine conservation with climate action. And there's been a lot of progress since those very early days in 2009 and 2010. And recently, blue carbon has become a commodity on the voluntary carbon market. And we're seeing some realizations of some opportunities of what that finance could achieve, but also some challenges, okay? And I'd like to start here with an illustration of how coastal habitat is used differently by men and women. This is from research with indigenous communities in Fiji and clearly illustrates who benefits and uses these ecosystems. Coastal blue carbon ecosystems, and that's the mangroves over here. Those are the ones with the sediment full of carbon and the carbon in the biomass. Coastal blue carbon ecosystems are primarily used by women. women currently disproportionately use and benefit from healthy blue carbon ecosystems. But what happens when you change the value of activities in these ecosystems? So if a blue carbon project comes in, then the value of this mangrove ecosystem is going to be completely different than what it was before, okay? Blue carbon implemented as a financial mechanism will have impacts both positive and negative. So even if you think blue carbon is the best thing since sliced bread, and I do, there will be impacts to communities regardless, one way or another. So it could reinforce existing gender inequities, may redefine women and men's gender roles and relations, or it could have lots of positive things, and I'll get into that in just a wee bit. Well, right now, actually.
Yeah.
So first off, the blue carbon market can work, okay? As I'm in the positive camp, I'd like to start with an example that community-based blue carbon projects. So here we have a project in Kenya called Mikoko Pamoja, and there's also a sister project just down the coast there, just south of Mombasa, called Vanga Blue Forests. And the carbon finance and benefit sharing from these blue carbon projects in the voluntary carbon market, the international voluntary carbon market, have been having great community impact. And this has been going on for quite a few years. The Mikoko Pamoja is a small-scale project encompassing only 117 hectares, and the communities associated with this project undertake the mangrove conservation and restoration activities. And then the profit that comes from, or the revenue that comes from the market, has been allocated by communities, community associations, and has supported the creation of 3 freshwater wells, providing sustainable, safe water to the community, school books for local children, hospital equipment, and other activities, or community benefit activities. And also, it was just recently reported that the performance of schools in students in local schools has increased, has improved due to the additional educational materials that they're able to be provided with. The blue carbon projects in Kenya are working, and the government is replicating and expanding them along the coast. I'd like to be a little bit punchy as well and repeat one of our project leads down there. You know, the overall sort of concept of blue carbon. It's nice to protect pretty things in the ocean, but who's going to pay for it? Okay? So we want to put marine protected areas out there. We want to support sustainable fisheries. We want to have coastal adaptation, mitigation, and support fantastically biodiverse ecosystems. How is that going to be realized as far as payment? Okay? And we know, some examples from the blue carbon market. It's not all rosy, okay? One project, and this was initiated in the early days of blue carbon, is the Senegal Saloum Delta project. And this project was built as one of the largest blue carbon projects at the time, back in the 2010, 2011s. It was an insetting project, so that's where there's groups of companies that get together and sort of develop it internally. And it was built as the largest mangrove restoration project on the planet. And just a couple years ago, the project proponents put out a report on this project. And if you read this report, it reads like as if this project is the best thing since sliced bread, and the communities loved it, everybody benefited, yada, yada. But one thing that's not included in that report is the peer-reviewed journal literature of researchers going down to Senegal and assessing who benefits from these projects. And there was human rights and socioeconomics impacts reported from this project that were not included in the quote-unquote independent review, okay, that was commissioned by the project proponents. And this includes basically that the communities lost access to their natural resources, were not informed about who would benefit from the project, and received meager pay for their work, okay? So we can do it right, and we can do it we can do it with lessons being learned, okay? Let's learn those lessons, okay? As this is now expanding on the voluntary carbon market, the flavor of the month, okay? There's also a large internal thriving blue carbon market in Japan, which seems to be working, where communities are receiving up to $500 a ton for their carbon offsets, and it's going towards seaweed and seagrass projects in Japan. Okay, so there's many different ways to cook this, to make this cake, so to speak. So the idea here is
1 minute.
1 minute. Okay. One more. Okay, I'll go on. Okay. Anyway, the idea is it along integrity? Is it real carbon, and who benefits? Okay. So is it real carbon? We have to make sure that the methodologies are robust to make sure that it's a real solution of climate change, and then who benefits? Do communities or other parties benefit from these projects? The communities in Kenya receive from 60 to 80% of the revenue. We know of projects where the communities receive 0% of the revenue. Okay? And there's lots of issues and perceived risks along with this application of this in the voluntary carbon market. Right now, I think we're experiencing sort of the Wild West of blue carbon in the blue carbon market, in the voluntary carbon market. I recently met with the community associations in Kenya, and they have terms for the brokers that come to hustle them to expand their projects and get a cut of their revenue. They call them coyotes. Okay? But ultimately, it's not the role of the market to govern these ecosystems. It's the role of governments to govern these ecosystems. So we can't expect too much from the market in any case. But is there an appetite for high integrity? Here we have Microsoft's criteria for investing in carbon offset projects, and they stress that they would like to invest in socially just projects. But the idea here is, how can consumers know what they're getting? Blue carbon is billed as high on carbon, biodiversity, and community benefit, but the only thing that's really being measured is the carbon. The other values are being measured in a narrative format, okay? Which can be problematic. And I'd just like to end with this slide. It is clear that multiple types of blue carbon offsets are on the voluntary carbon market. However, from our experiences with the United Nations Environment Programme and with the government of Norway, we know what high integrity projects are. They actually deliver on these multiple benefits. Here's an image from the Vanga Bay Community Association in Kenya. And this is an association. This is ultimately transparent for all of the community to see. Right on the wall is all of the financial transactions from the selling of blue carbon projects. So everybody in the community can see this, so they know what's happening to this money. They can ask questions about it. Okay,
Stephen?
I would love if this was the same with other projects.
I'll give you back the word.
Okay.
Just thank you so much. Caroline, Stephen is thinking that this is the best thing that happened since sliced bread. And he is very positive to this. I'm curious about.
And then you have invited me for a reason, right?
No. It's always a pleasure. But maybe you can nuance things a little bit. Do you see any downfalls?
Absolutely. First, a disclaimer: I'm not an expert in blue carbon, like my co-panelists at all. My background is not biology. I'm a social anthropologist, but I've been working with WWF for 15 years, and I've been involved in a lot of our projects, basically across the world. And for full disclosure, in the kind of the notes for this meeting, it says I'm the skeptical one. And I think Stephen alluded to some of these things. And what I'm most concerned about is the language around either it's blue carbon or green carbon, is how it's now being seen as one of the silver bullets in many ways. And not necessarily from those who really know what it is and how it should look like, but from the corporate sector. But also from government sector in many areas, where they are not too preoccupied setting up good governance systems, where they actually leave a lot to the private sector to solve. And it's often the civil society who is kind of the watchdog of this work. And more literature has come across the green carbon projects across the world. And it's overwhelming how many of those schemes is actually not doing what they're saying they're going to do. There is no kind of guarantee for actually, for example, on forest, we've seen that how do you make sure that the forest stands in 60 years, if that's the time span they're going to take up the carbon? How do you work with local communities? How do you actually make sure they benefit? And the reason why I'm skeptical is that we have seen similar conversation like this before in other solutions. I think the whole environmental movement in the world is regretting the hallelujah around biofuels. kind of biofuels as one of the key things to lower emission in the transport industry, which actually led to pressure and a lot of biodiversity across the world, kind of cutting direct to use to biofuel. And we have seen it on certification schemes. Certification schemes is a tool, but it has very often been the end goal for a lot of things, and saying as long as it's certified, it's good for biodiversity, it's good for climate, but we also know it doesn't really address the drivers, for example, around deforestation or the driver overconsumption. So when it comes to the carbon market, and I think instead of me doing a long introduction, I would go back to the different challenges during the conversation, because there is a lot of risks. There are also benefits done right, but I think the key thing is the monetizing of this is clear. And we know when monetizing, it's actually quite hard for the less powerful, the local communities, to actually be the key stakeholder that benefits. And the corporate sector is loving this. And I work with the corporate sector for also 15 years. That's why I started in WWF, working with the seafood industry directly. And I worked with oil and gas sector, I worked with energy sector, I worked with everything, basically. And still the conversation is, it's how can we offset instead of cutting our own emissions? Because it's still cheaper to offset than take the real emission cut. So what I'm preoccupied with all of this in this discussion is that I'm not skeptical to the blue carbon as such. Blue carbon is key. We need kind of natural carbon storage. That's key going forward. But how do we this doesn't come as the solution for both governments and the corporate sector to be so powerful, so strong in this, that the local community, we could have good examples, but in the overall, they are the most vulnerable and is in the most of the cases not necessarily protected as such. Because we say it's not the market who can set up the government structure, but the companies goes to this country where the government mechanism is the weakest, right? So it's balancing this and, of course, getting money, getting what you seems as free money to protect an area, to do storage, to have activity. It's, of course, tempting. And it's hard maybe to see the long-term perspective of this. And also my key concern is also I haven't seen blue carbon credit schemes that really take on the long-term view. So what happens if a company withdraws? If nobody wants to pay this mangroves area? If we build up a community dependent on the blue carbon scheme, so to speak? And all of these things, I need to just think it needs to be better really addressed before we go straight into, yes, it can work, but the but is so big for me right now, and lessons learned from previous solution on this. Let's make sure that we put most effort on the but, so we actually can get good carbon credit schemes, because they need it as part of the Paris Agreement. We know we need carbon storage schemes, both on land and in ocean, going forward. So I'm not challenging that, but I'm challenging that kind of it's too early to say that this might work in a good way for local communities and conservation, but it's still a might in the long-term run. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Gabriella, emphasis on the but. You will tell us a little bit more the role of blue carbon finance in a development perspective, also from the NORAD's point of view. So, and now you heard both Steve and Caroline, and I'm sure that you can empathize with both. So please.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Gabriella Kosman, and I work in NORAD in the section for oceans. I've been having the privilege of working on ocean-related matters for quite a while. NORAD is for those who don't know us, it's a Norwegian agency for development cooperation. We're under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We get instructions from them, and we manage about half of the official development assistance that Norway provides in many parts of the world. So, and just to give you a little bit of understanding of how much is ocean-related support when we do development work, it's less than 1% of the total amount. So it's less than 1%. Yes, but this is a very important topic, and I'm really pleased to be here. So I've listened to I would say, Carolina, that you are an expert, but I'm listening to both the panelists here. I'm a bureaucrat, but it's a but, it's a might, it's a opportunity, challenges, too early. There is a lot of links to international conventions, negotiations going on, how to actually do the reporting, coherent methodology, standards, and so forth. So this is very important. But I would like to take the opportunity to actually talk a little bit about a concrete example that we do in Norwegian development assistance. So we work with Indonesia. Indonesia is one of the countries that have the largest, maybe even the largest, blue carbon ecosystems in the world. Huge areas. And what we do is that we support them with 2 projects. First of all, I just want to raise your attention. I just put some pictures here to describe the threats that they're trying to tackle when they are approaching the blue economy. Blue carbon is a part of this, so I'm coming to that. We have pollution, we have climate change, habitat degradation, overfishing. These are some of the main threats that Indonesia has identified. So in our cooperation with Indonesia, we have a really close bilateral institutional cooperation. So Norwegian experts from Statistics Norway, SSB, from NIVA, Norwegian Institute for Water Research, and also GRID-Arendal is working together with governmental institutions. Now we're talking about Indonesia is 270 million people, 17,000 islands, a lot of different ministries, and a very complex political system of how it's actually run and managed. So we have a large group of partners in the government that we work with on a daily basis. What we're trying to aim here is to improve the ocean management. We are having the purpose of the cooperation, it's a long-term cooperation, it's going to go all the way until 2028, strengthening the sustainability and inclusiveness of the Indonesian ocean economy. And the 2 projects I mentioned, it's ocean accounting. Maybe this is a little bit for the nerdy people. So ocean accounting is national accounts for the ocean, to get a really good overview of the blue economy. That is putting all the pluses and minuses into one basket. Having waste accounts as well, that is not a plus, we know that, but there's some values in waste as well. So it's to be inclusive, and carbon accounts is also part of the ocean accounts. And then we have this project with GRID, Indonesian High Integrity Blue Carbon Market Project. This is an advising role that GRID-Arendal has, and it's demand-driven. Both of these are demand-driven. So they work with also the government to talk with them, because Indonesia has really advanced in their plans of trying to figure out how they will manage their huge blue carbon ecosystems going forward. So yeah, this is a quote from one of the experts in Statistics Norway. Developing ocean accounts is a complex and time-consuming process that cannot be achieved overnight, but still, you have to start somewhere. Norway started, we have a pilot, Oslo Fjord, I think it started in 2021, and Indonesia started their pilot in 2019, so they were actually a bit ahead. I am not sure how many minutes I have left.
At least 2.
At least 2, okay,
Yeah.
That's good. So, as I said, it's from 2024 to 2028. So it's very important to have a long-term cooperation in place. So we have an agreement, we have a dialogue, we have discussions on many of the socio-economic factors here as well, because when building this ocean accounts, you take one block after another. So it's also about having an ongoing discussion on different socioeconomic variables that you can include. But we have 3 components: ecosystem service accounting. This includes carbon accounting, which is about getting numbers on how much carbon that, for example, mangroves can store, the sequestration level. And then maritime GDP, this is different kinds of subsidies and taxes and so forth on, for example, shipping, and also statistical information system, extremely important. And this is the area where we are supporting in Indonesia. It's in Sabu Sea. So this is mangroves, but this is in Mayotte between Madagascar and mangroves, Madagascar and Mozambique. I just wanted to mention, so how we think about the ocean accounting work is that it's not a lot of money. Actually, it's very little money if you look at it in the big context of this less than 1% that goes to ocean-related ODA activities, development activities. But we have a really close collaboration, and it's shoulder to shoulder. There's a lot of research as well between institutions, Statistics Indonesia, Statistics Norway, but also other geospatial agency, a lot of universities in Indonesia. And we're trying to have some kind of, it's a research collaboration, but it's also capacity building, of course. I'm not going to go into more details on that. I just want to mention that Indonesia is doing a lot of ocean accounting, so the national accounts on oceans, which includes carbon, and that will be important when you develop carbon mechanism. They want to develop a dashboard that will be able to answer questions and find balances between investing in blue economy sectors and putting a focus on the protection of marine environment. So costs involved. But it's not only the economic, it's also the social and ecological.
Thank you,
Thank
Gabriella, and you will get a chance to elaborate. But can I please ask you to come a little bit? It felt strange
Okie dokie.
with the distance
Isn't it?
between us. Yes, please.
We're bringing this into. Why not?
Thank you. Good. There's a lot of information and some buts. And I think we need to dig a little bit deeper into this. And Stephen, I'll start with you.
Uh-oh.
I'm sure you can do it. How can we secure, how can blue carbon serve as, if we want it to be a robust financial mechanism, can it be that whilst ensuring the protection and restoration of coastal ecosystems? Align a little bit with the worries that kind of is also expressed here.
I would say, one, there is a need for these types of financial mechanisms to be advanced. And, I'm well aware of the risks that are involved and the concerns. But I would push back a wee bit on the too early part, respectfully, because blue carbon projects have expanded by orders of magnitude over the past just a couple years or few years. And many coastal nations are having these projects being developed. So can they be robust? I think the Guardian produced an article just last year based on some research that looked at rainforest projects, and that they had basically potentially fraudulent reporting on the carbon benefits. And there has been reporting that some of these projects also have negative socioeconomic impacts as well. I would say the carbon market is in a state of flux. It's not doing too well because of the integrity issues right now. So the opportunity for blue carbon is to learn the lessons from the terrestrial experience and to put a better job together. Now, Indonesia is developing its own internal carbon market. They are going full forward with this. Japan already has their internal market. Other countries are doing similar, and other countries are engaging with the international market. Part of what we're doing with the United Nations Environment Programme, we're going to be producing the Blue Carbon 2 report, and this should give guidance to countries on addressing these risks, recognizing these risks, and coming up with robust systems. But do we have the answer for that yet? No. But we're on that. We're definitely trying to be as rapid as possible to get there.
Yeah. Let me challenge you a little bit. One more question, because you touch into some of the risks, and what I pick up on in Karoline's statement is the long-term commitment from private sector. I also come from private sector, and the market is not perfect. Private sector is definitely not perfect. How can we secure that? How can we hedge a risk like that? Because we can't possibly control that, can we? How do we hedge it?
It's a market, so there will be fluctuations. I mean, there are some insurances in these projects. They do take a percentage cut. Some of these projects do take a percentage cut to make sure that they can
Is that
cope for
sustainable
that.
enough?
To cope for that and things like coastal destruction from storms. I would say, the projects in Kenya, we have an example of 10 years. That's not a small amount of time that this project has been working. Obviously, the vast majority of projects that are on the market right now are a much shorter time span. But I think, if you do something like develop standards, if you do something like develop metrics for not just the carbon, but for also these community benefits and biodiversity benefits, then you have a better way of assessing what is really going on with these projects. When you read the reporting of some of these projects right now, it's kind of like reading used car salesman brochures. So you're reading only the best from these projects. What you really need is to look under the hood to be able to compare these projects to see if they're doing good or not. I'm sure there's some great projects out there and some questionable ones, but we need to be able to assess that.
And that leads me to the last question in this run. The innovations or strategies, how do we scale? I mean, because Gabrielle also, we point to several small, not small, but some projects here and there. Is it scalable? And then is it, should we?
So there is a drive. There's two standards that the blue carbon projects are operating on under the voluntary carbon market. The Plan Vivo standard, which is for very small scale projects. Very heavily community-based projects, and those seems to be less risky. And then the Vera standard, when they go for like these really big projects, which also have this sort of risk. So the question is definitely how do you embed this integrity into these higher volume projects, because that's what the industry would like to see. They don't want to deal with just a couple offsets here and there. And I don't think that we have a great system for that yet. Conservation International, along with us and a number of others, developed something called the Principles and Guidelines for high quality blue carbon. And through UNEP, we put out a blue carbon code of conduct for developing socially just projects. But I think we're still sort of in that road of developing that to seeing if it's going to be a standard. UN has the high integrity carbon market council. But that's a voluntary thing. So maybe partnership with industry partners that want to do the right thing, because I think the industry would like to buy the right offsets and not the wrong ones.
Yeah.
But I think there's work to be done.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. And that's a beautiful bridge to you, Caroline. I didn't hear you as just skeptics. I hear you also say that we need this. Basically, maybe what I interpret you to say is that we need all the good initiatives we can get at this point in our history. But is there alternative? Can we leave the market out of this? And can we say that it's up to governments and we need to secure that ownership? Do we need private sector?
I think that's a far bigger question than just the carbon market, because that's come back to, do you believe if the market is able to solve the climate mitigation efforts we need, right? Because we point to the market forces to be the strongest forces, but we also know that the market has, if you look at the markets going ahead, we're not going to cut emission at the rate we need, going to. So I think kind of trusting in the market in this is probably what is the most concerning part for me. Regardless of it's in the ocean or on land, because I do feel, I think maybe it's the entry point to the discussion. I think kind of what Stephen is describing on how it's setting up in terms of robustness, standards, governance structure, piloting the best examples, how it could be done is good and needed and probably should be done more of. But at the same time, I think kind of we have to be then a little bit cautious about how we sell that in, right? Because I think that's why I see that the company, kind of the corporate sector, the private market is jumping on some of these and also wants to co-finance some of this work, right? Because they're really looking to these projects to not to take the cost themselves by cutting emissions and we see that the latest with the SBTI, which is which has a mechanism setting up for the business sector to set scientific-based targets, which is called Scope 1 and 2 and 3. And there's a huge debate now there about kind of Scope 3, if they can buy themselves out of these things. And we see that more and more businesses saying 2030 is getting too difficult.
Yes.
So we are then looking into the carbon market. We need more of that because we aren't able to cut their emission. Some of these companies are able to cut their emissions, but they are not willing to. And I think that's why, so that's kind of my key thing, I think, into the conversation, because it can be potentially an effective mechanism to channel climate finance, and particularly to global south, can have strong co-benefits that we have talked about, and also raise awareness of kind of the ocean as a carbon storage. But I also want to kind of, if you think about it, why do we always talk about carbon schemes in the south?
Yes.
Right? Why does companies have to go to the south to do this? We could restore the kelp forest here in Norway. Companies could support that. We would take up emission the same way the mangroves does. Nothing necessarily means that you channel funding into to livelihoods, poor communities, and so on.
Yep.
But it comes back to it's more expensive, it's better government system maybe in place. It's easier to just go to the south and say that this is an area where we should develop and so on. So I'm missing that part of the conversation as well, because we see that in forestry. You see that on climate accounting nationally. There's a huge debate in EU, Norway, about the inclusion of forest. How do you do that? A lot of people want to have more inclusion of that, because then we don't have to cut our emission that much if we include the carbon storage for some of the forestry, right? So it's a huge debate on all of this, and so I think what we just have to make sure that, for example, headlines like this is kind of last resort. It's not the first thing the companies should do, it's the last thing they should do, and when they do it right. Right? Because I think that's kind of what happened with the biofuel discussion in a lot of places. They're going for biofuel instead of electrifying and looking at to kind of maybe less transport and so on. You don't solve everything with biofuels. So that's kind of my key, I think.
Thank you, Caroline. And Gabrielle, I think I will challenge you by responding to Caroline first, if you want.
Well, I was actually looking at Stephen now.
No.
Right?
No, but why do we only have projects in the global south? What does this look like from a development NORAD point of view?
I do not work with the policy side. I'm
development
neither
side.
in the Minister of Foreign Affairs or the Climate and Environment Ministry. So just to have that
Good.
said, so I can't answer to that question.
No, that was more philosophically something to think about.
Yeah. No, it was more. You don't
here.
have to answer, Gabrielle. Just a reflection.
I have a reflection, though.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Of course, I think that there should be more debate on that. Yesterday, I listened to a discussion of how to actually restore the seaweed forest, Tareskogen, in Norway, which has been eaten up by kråkebolle urchins, I think. And it's so devastating. It's really destroying all the forest that we have, the blue forest. And there are, possibilities to think a little bit outside of the box in terms of companies coming in, trying to do something about these urchins, laser drones or hammers, kill them, get the forest back, something like that. So yes, of course, I agree. There is a possibility to do a lot of things, but in this case, in our development work, we do the ocean accounting is also an advice from like 350 researchers around the world. It came with the high-level ocean panel for sustainable ocean economy. So it's about getting all the facts on the table and actually getting a better overview of the blue economy, right? So I think this is a good step, and from a development perspective, this is something that we can assist with through our people or Norwegian institutions with great brains and expertise areas to actually think about how can that be done. people working with tidy, good, qualitative, good data, right, in Statistics Norway, going into Indonesia, looking at these numbers that they have, trying to figure out, okay, what can we do here to make this better, etc. So.
Yes, very good. So that's a little bit on the capacity building side.
Yes.
I would say. So what roles does policy play in building the capacity of developed nations? Can you elaborate a little bit on
Sure. I can go to the example of Indonesia again.
Yes, please do.
Because I think also in terms of the policy, it's important that when we do development work, we look at their own national policy. So in Indonesia, you have a blue economy policy program. And in this program, it's the plan goes from now 25 to 29. They have integrated ocean accounting completely. So they're also a high-level panel country, as Norway is. But they are going all in to actually do ocean accounting and work on this issue. And they have included, and so the policy is really important.
Yes,
This
yes,
is like
yes.
the tool that they should have on how to do it. But while doing that, the ocean accounting is not like just, it's not a GDP sort of setup. It's much more. So there's room all the time to have discussions on new variables, new socioeconomic issues or aspects that come in. I was actually going to think about what you said about the long term also, you know? This is extremely important. And Indonesia is also thinking about the short term or what happens in the long term. How will this actually have, what impact will it have? Long-term impact if you have different stresses that comes. Let's say also weather-wise in mangroves. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gabriella. Now the word is free. Stephen, I think
just
it's
wanted to give a
Caroline.
quick response. First off, regarding the Indonesia and capacity building that we're supporting the government of Norway on NORAD with, is we just had a workshop in Jakarta a month ago where we brought the community representatives from the Kenyan projects to Jakarta to engage with ministry and stakeholder folks in Jakarta to show, basically looking at this, what the benefit sharing is, to see how you can do a project right. We also brought academics who had a critical lens on blue carbon in the market to give a sort of reality check. And I would like to also, this sort of segues into a little bit of response to what you've said on blue carbon as a silver bullet. And I would say that the blue carbon community has done a great job of selling the benefits of blue carbon, but we haven't done a great job of looking at these sort of risks and lessons learned. I don't think when blue carbon was launched, it was supposed to be the silver bullet for anything. I think the message was supposed to be address your emissions first, and then if you'd like to protect these ecosystems, then go ahead and do that. But I think that message has sort of been lost over the years as the drive to move things forward. And why not the South? Why not here? Well, maybe Norway could benefit from what's going on in Japan. Japan is definitely not the global South, and they have a thriving internal market where the projects are actually working for coastal communities there. So that might be a model that we could look at and potentially replicate or partner with there. But why the global South is that's where the massive degradation of these ecosystems is occurring. Okay, and then you take away livelihoods, you take away coastal protection. I mean, that's where the crisis is. That's where the biodiversity crisis is. And so that's why with us, when we support the UN Environment Program, we're not going to set up a project necessarily in California or Miami or Norway, but we want to go where the need is, and that's where I'd say where the greatest need is.
Excellent, Caroline, and then
Yeah,
Gabriella.
and I think part of this is also part of the discussion when we're discussing both ocean accounting as such and the blue carbon mechanism. Is the kind of reason for why we do it, as you said, mentioned Stephen, but also in that terms of kind of what are the drivers behind the degradation in these areas, because they are quite diverse. So kind of how do you set up a scheme that also kind of what is the key driver for losing mangroves, for example, in Indonesia versus Kenya versus Tanzania versus Mozambique and so on. And I think looking maybe a way forward as well, I think lessons learned from the certification scheme sector, where you have certification schemes that is kind of setting high standards, good standards, for example, avoiding deforestation, protecting nature, maybe work with communities, as many of the environmental certification scheme doesn't do it necessarily in a proper way, is that it doesn't assess the drivers, right? So it's kind of can be one company can do everything okay, good, and in this areas, and right next to it is happening something else, and it's also impacting those. So I think kind of how can we expand probably the discussion around both blue carbon mechanism, but how do we actually get sustainable finance into both kind of nature-based solution that this is, which kind of where carbon mechanism can be one thing, but how do we actually lift that discussion that can be a tool for that, but nature-based solution, how do we finance that to the benefit both for the climate, nature, and the communities, right? So if we start with that discussion and then see the carbon certification and so on governance system, then you can get the better idea which tool fits where, but you don't forget the overall thing about it, why we are doing it, and at the same time really, really hold the private sector accountable in terms of also maybe saying, no, you shouldn't go for a carbon offset right now because you're not doing enough in cutting your own emission, advising in that. So we get the package. I think there is a really way forward for this. And I'm pretty sure WWF is going to be involved in some of this work, so it's not like we are just not touching this or anything. But I think kind of lessons learned, we just have to make sure that we get the, and I want to say a Norwegian saying, but when you translate them to English, it doesn't sound like them.
Say it in Norwegian.
Komme rett ut fra hoppkanten.
That's a good
How do
saying.
you translate that? Getting it right from the start.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. We are approaching the end with Gabriella, and thank you, Caroline. Gabriella, do you want to comment on?
Well, I think that was a good way of rounding up that Caroline made by having the carbon, the biodiversity, and the community aspects being part of that credit, let's call it, if you talk about that kind of solution, both for mitigation and adaptation. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I picked up that, even though, you didn't really disagree, but I think what kind of came up here is the need for regulation, for complex cooperation, for asking the right questions before we kind of jump into things that we cannot control. So the why, and take care of the buts, and we look forward to continuing the cooperation, and it's part of the solution. I think we also concluded with that. So thank you so much, Caroline, Stephen, and Gabriella. And thank you to the audience. Yes. Have a nice evening.
Thanks.